All right, so we'll go ahead and get started just to be respectful of people's times. Thank you guys for joining the Interpersonal Communications webinar. I am Greg Murray, founder of Adaptive Edge Coaching, and I think you're going to find this information really, really helpful today. And we'll just go ahead and dive right in. First, I want to introduce you to the wonderful team that I'm working with. So I'll introduce myself first. So I'm a developmental psychologist. I have the training in human development and psychology from Harvard, where I was trained in the theoretical model of constructivism, how people learn, grow, and change across the lifespan. Before that, I was a teacher. So I've always been interested in those topics of learning and change. But I also was trained in coaching there, a specific method called immunity to change. And I have since done a lot of independent research on identity and emotion. So this is social psychology, and been applying that in many different settings. And I'll talk about that in just a second. I've got my digital marketing interns with me every day. So we've got Nina on the left there, and she is a master's in integrated marketing program at Marist University. So she's really a great help on the marketing front. And then Connor on the right, he's doing the design work. So all the great design you see on these slides on Instagram, if you're tuned in, really, really great stuff. He's a whiz with the video too. So really happy to have him. And then we've got Niathi and Kayla doing blog work every week, and hopefully you've been able to tune into the blog. It's really great stuff. Niathi's work, she's a psychology major at UNC Wilmington, UNC Charlotte, and she works in a behavioral lab there too. So she's really great with doing the psych research and kind of translating it for immediate impact that people can have in their life, while Kayla's a bit more artistic, doing long form blogs. So encourage you to check that out for sure. So a little bit more about adaptive edge coaching and just kind of the areas of expertise that I mentioned. So the psychology of change is, fundamental to what I'm doing with people. So when I say change, I'm kind of talking about two things. One is life changes. So when people are getting married, divorced, graduating college, changing careers, any major event, a death in the family, these are life changes that I support people through. But then also the psychology of change, and whether that's just simple things like changing behaviors, losing weight, quitting smoking, or more complex about changing your beliefs about yourself, about the world, and what you may think of changing as personality, of maybe you're a shy person and you want to be more expressive and things like that. This is really about identity, and it's a big part of what I do. The other big area is emotion. And so I've done a lot of research on emotion from the evolutionary standpoint, as well as the psychological construction of emotion. So really, really help people to understand their emotion, become more emotionally intelligent, become more appreciative of their emotion. Because I think a lot in our culture, we tend to pathologize emotion, or just not share emotions, unfortunately. So it's a big focus and something I really enjoy. And then the last piece here is communication. And this is what you'll get a peek at today. A big part of my training at Harvard was on communication, negotiations, difficult conversations. And so everything you'll see here today is, applicable to every conversation that you have, whether it's at work or at home, and the relationships that are important in your life. So I help people to just improve their communication skills, avoid unnecessary conflict and repeated conflict, especially things that are coming up again and again between people. I really enjoy helping people with that. All right, so how's it delivered? I work with organizations. I do a lot of one-on-one stuff, and coming up, there will be Adaptive Edge Academy. I'm really, really excited to launch that next month, where people can learn on their own time and at an affordable price. Whereas a lot of this stuff, for example, you have to pay maybe $50,000 to get a master's degree. I'm going to give it to you at a much more affordable rate, and really at a doing constructive work. So as I said, I'm a former teacher. I'm still teaching at a university, at a business school here. I'm based in Lyon, France. So teaching is something I'm really passionate about. So look out for that coming soon. All right. So we'll get into what we're doing today. Now, we'll start off with conflict, assertiveness, and feedback before we get into difficult conversations. Conflict, assertiveness, and feedback are all part of difficult conversations. So I'm doing that first. And then lastly is negotiations. And the reason I'm doing that last is because if you go through, if you're assertive, if you understand conflict styles, and even if you go through a difficult conversation protocol with somebody and you still are having issues, well, then that's how you know you have a negotiation on your hand. And there's principles that I help people with to get the most out of that. Yeah, so just something to keep in mind that you can contact about any time about any of these things at any time. I have specific protocols that I help people with. This will become courses on the website, but for now, it's I really enjoy helping people with this one-on-one, and we work on worksheets together. I assign exercises. We can work on specific conflicts if you're having them. So I really do enjoy this work. All right. Another thing to say real quick is you can ask questions at any time with the chat function, and happy to answer those. I do have breaks in between these sections where I can respond to questions and things like that. And Nina's gonna look out for that and just let me know if someone's asking questions. All right. So starting off with conflict. Three things here is that it's a part of life. I think a lot of people tend to shy away from conflict because it doesn't feel good, and maybe people don't like being angry and confrontation and things like that. But it does produce actually, constructive and growth and things like that. So it's an important part of life. Another key thing here is if you internalize this information, you really can break repetitive patterns. And you'll see in a second here that people tend to rely on certain conflict styles, and that produces the same types of problems in their relationships. So it's a really good idea to break those patterns. And as you'll see, you can strategically use the different types of conflicts in different situations to get the best result. So again, it is a little bit of an art and a science at the same time. So as you see here, there's an x-axis and a y-axis here. So we've got the 5 types. But if you take a look at the bottom here, cooperativeness is the x-axis, so to speak, and from low to high, and then the y-axis being assertiveness. So if we take a look first at competition, this is the least cooperative and most assertive form of conflict. This is where people have a zero-sum orientation, which just means that 2 people cannot win. A win for me means a loss for the other person. All right. So it's a power struggle. It's what you think of as a competition. It can be damaging to relationships. It's definitely one negative of this conflict style to think about. Collaboration is the one that's kind of most highly touted in organizations. This is where 2 people are expanding their range of options. They're getting creative to get everybody's interests met. This is a win-win again. So this is ideal for working situations where you do want to preserve the relationship and get everybody's interests met. I mean, who wouldn't want a win-win, right? So it's definitely one of the most preferred options if you can do it. The next one is compromise. So this is in the middle range between assertive and cooperative, and it's not as good as collaboration because you're not going to get all your needs met, but you will get those minimal needs met. So it's minimally acceptable to all parties, and at least you won't damage the relationship as you might with a competition and things like that. So compromise is definitely better than some other options. Avoidance is low on assertiveness and low on cooperativeness, and it sounds like maybe the worst one, right? We know people who are avoidant, and obviously this doesn't make the conflict go away. So but it does have its benefits as well. If it can actually preserve a relationship rather than just maybe having a competition where you're going to damage it, but avoiding it, maintains neutrality in that way. And it delays things. And then accommodation. This is, I would say the most people that I help the most are the ones who have a habit of accommodating, and they accede to other people's wishes. They have a habit of not getting their own needs met. Now, of course, this maintains harmony and people aren't going to be angry and things like that. But there's a lot that goes unsaid, a lot of needs that go unmet. So really accommodation, you don't want to rely on it too much, but there are certain situations where it is positive, and I'll get to that right now. So they all have different goals, right? So sticking with accommodating in the bottom right, the goal is to yield. So if you're working with someone who has more authority than you, if you don't want to challenge your boss, for example, and you want to just kind of go with the flow for this specific time, it's not worth it to start a confrontation, then accommodating is an option. Avoiding, you can delay something. It's not going to produce a result. It's not going to produce a resolution, but you can delay. And then, you've got the different goals of these other ones here that you can take a look at. But yeah, it's interesting to work with people who slowly start to master these things, and we can really analyze these together, any situation that you've got going on, to talk about, hey, what is the goal here? What do you think is the best solution for you right now? Should we delay this a little bit? Okay, should we avoid? And then what does that look like? So there is no best. Like I said, collaborating in organizations, it oftentimes is touted as the best, but it's not always. So just good stuff to think about here. And I really do enjoy working with people on this stuff. All right. So assertiveness is the next topic. Please do let me know if there's any questions on conflict. But assertiveness, there's typically four problems that come along with someone who's, hesitant to speak up, who is perhaps maybe being too accommodating, for example, or too avoidant, or even too compromising, right? So it's basically people who are on these low end of assertiveness. You can end up not getting your needs met. So there's four problems, and one is the risk reward miscalculation. I'll talk about all these in depth. The second one is identity fears. Third one is an inner conflict, and the fourth one is a lack of awareness. So what do I mean by risk reward miscalculation? So the risk reward miscalculation is simply when people don't understand whether they should speak up or not. And typically what people do is they think that it's too risky to speak up, that the punishment or the consequences of speaking up are going to be too great. It's going to damage them. It's going to damage the relationship, whatever it may be. So quick solution to this is just simply, to speak about both. Okay. So what are the costs of not speaking up? What are the costs essentially of not getting your needs met? Right. And then what are the costs of speaking up? So just I help people with this to theoretically think through all of the options. Okay. So if you don't speak up, what will happen? And then if you do, what could potentially happen? So this is one thing that people that I help people with. The next thing is identity fears, and identity is something I'm really passionate about. And when I was at Harvard, every single class, whether it was communication, whether it was emotion, whether it was psychology, kept coming back to identity. So I've linked all these things together. But basically, if we're hesitant to speak up, or if we're about to go into a conflict or something that may not go the way we want, it might say something about us. And so we need to gain awareness about our identity as well as theirs. So an example here is that, okay, I don't want to be seen as greedy or disrespectful, so I won't speak up. I don't want to be seen as needy, and things like that. I don't want to be seen as dominating, or it's just there's many, many things that people fear that being assertive or getting their needs met might say about them. Lazy, cold-hearted. There's so many things. So this is just something that I help people think about beforehand, because it's not that it's not true. It may actually be true. It may actually be important to address ahead of time as well. Not that it's true that they're needy, but it's true that the conversation might suggest, for example, that they're needy. So really, really important. I don't really ever tell someone how your fears are irrational. That's not true. It's like, if this is a fear of yours, it's important to just kind of work with it. Inner conflict about what to say. So I'll talk about in the next slide how I, kind of order things for people, of what I help them think about. But this is very simple to solve, actually, is with a role play. So you can do that with me as a coach. You can do that with another person, of course. But you can also do this with yourself. So when I was at Harvard, there was this two-chair method that they called it. So if you can picture just two chairs sitting next to each other, you sit in one chair as yourself and then say what you might have to say, and then you go and you sit in the other chair and respond as if you're the other person. So it sounds weird, but it's very, very effective actually. And it just gets this out loud, and you start to think about how does it sound to say these things and how they might be received. So it's really nice. Then the fourth one is just the lack of awareness about directness, about how direct you should be, about how direct you're coming off. We don't want to be too direct. So this is what I was referencing earlier, is a really good solution is to be transparent about the purposes, the reason for having the conversation. If this helps with the identity thing too. So before you're triggering someone's identities, say, well, here's why I'm having the conversation. And you also, so some perilous purposes that might be inferred if you're not direct and put these out into the open, right? Telling them they're wrong, publicly shaming them, changing them, whether it's changing their mind, their behavior, whatever, or just like revenge, payback. These are not good reasons to start off a conversation, right? But people can infer that if you bring up a topic, especially in front of other people, they might think that you're shaming them. So some better purposes to think about here, call them promising purposes. One is it's just to express your view. So you can imagine, like, I just want to tell you how I think about this or how I feel, right? Then this person knows, oh, well, they're not telling me I'm wrong necessarily. The other one is just to raise awareness and suggest a solution. That's big too. It's not just to raise the problem, but also be right off the bat, say, hey, I'm here to be part of the solution. I have a suggestion. Transparency, I think everybody always likes that. Learning and increasing efficiency. So again, we'll just take the last one, for example. I just want to put this out into the open so that we can do this work more quickly. It's not about, you being wrong or right, or me being right, but I really think that we can improve the system. So these are really good purposes to bring up that make people feel not threatened. And it's good stuff. All right. I have done many posts about this. I've done videos about this. If you guys are tuned into the Instagram, I'm going to put this on YouTube as well. But I think this is fascinating, actually, when I learned this. And these are speech acts. So this comes down to linguistics as well. A sentence that makes sense is a speech act. So we've got 5 classifications here, and they increase in levels of assertiveness. And, it's super interesting to listen to a meeting, for example, and see who's making the most commands, who's making the most suggestions, for example, and then you can really see what their tendencies are. This has also been studied a lot with co-pilots and pilots, their communication patterns. And so it's been shown that there are fewer crashes and fewer accidents and things like that when the co-pilot, who has less authority, understands this better. And when he knows he's right, he or she, when they know they're right, issues a command instead of just making an observation like, hey, this metric is down if you look at the gauge, whatever. So that, plus with surgeons and their nurses and their helping staff and things like that, they've done a lot of studies on this, that when the helping staff is more aware of their assertiveness levels and they know they're right and that the patient can be harmed and things like that, if they're just asking a question or giving suggestions, it's more likely that the patient will be harmed. So really, really interesting stuff. And this again is an art, knowing when to ask questions or when to make proposals. I'm a coach, for example. I'm not giving many commands at all. It would not be received well. I'm mostly asking questions, observations, and things like that. So it depends on your role, and it depends on the situation. But I've done a video on this, so there's lots of good examples out there. All right, what's next here? All right, so I see we have a question here. What's the question? People are not categories. These 5 types of personalities, different relationships. Yeah, this is a good question about personality. I'm pretty big on personality as far as, like, I hate it. Well, I don't hate it, but I think that people are really obsessed over personality, and really this is identity. A lot of behaviors come down to identity. So the question is about conflict styles, I think, and saying that, people can have, I said that people have tendencies. So a person who accommodates a lot, for example, they might think, well, this is my personality. I'm passive. I keep the peace. But this is for sure can be changed. The question is, can it be changed? And absolutely, it can be changed. It comes down to identity and beliefs. Like dominance, for example, is a big five trait of personality. It's one of the categories, but it's also in the research on identity. If somebody believes that they are dominant in a marriage, for example, or at the workplace, it's a belief that they should have authority in a situation. So dominance, it's really interesting stuff, but really good question. And I hope I answered that for you. All right, next section is on feedback. And this is everywhere. Every single job should involve feedback. And the problem is that it's so essential to growth, but if it's not packaged well, or the person doesn't know how to receive it well, and also manage up and say, hey, I need this feedback from you, then you really miss opportunities for growth. I mean, some companies, they have one feedback session per year, or like one formal review process per year. And it's like, it's really, really important. So I said here, without, it can just go in one ear and out the other. So there's three types: appreciation, coaching, and evaluation. And when appreciation, I'm just saying things like, I notice you, I get you, and you matter. And it should be the first thing to come. Before you criticize anybody, you want to appreciate them, make them feel safe and things like that. And you should appreciate early and often. This is what the research says. Coaching is essential. If you don't show someone how they can improve, you're not helping them, and they'd be better off working somewhere else, or they just won't know how to do better. Evaluation is, it's more about metrics, grading, percentages, scores. Here's where you stand. Here's what you can expect. It's usually based on a rubric or some type of measurement system, ideally laid out in advance. So you need all three. This is the other thing, you need all three to have effective feedback. You can't have evaluation with no coaching. I mean, this is so frustrating. Maybe you guys have worked in situations like this where people are just criticizing you and not showing you how to get better. That's the worst. So really, really important stuff. Here's how you can manage up. And I say this a lot when I work with up and coming talent, people in their 20s, early 30s who have not made it to that middle management or upper level management yet. I teach them how to solicit the feedback that's going to help them. And so a lot of times we'll get this, and I'm probably guilty of this as well. You'll get these platitudes: you're doing great, or this was inappropriate, or you can be more proactive. Is very general, right? And so you first need to understand, well, what are they basing this on? Where's it coming from? Is this an observation? Are these some expectations that were set that I haven't met? Are they making their own interpretation about something? Or are there some implicit rules perhaps that go on in this organization that I'm not aware of? It's not in the handbook, for example, but it's just kind of in the air. It's in the culture. It's how people interact. So this is important to think about. And then the next thing is, where is it going? What to do with the feedback? What specifically do they want you to do differently? So it's really helpful, and I help people prepare for their feedback conversations. All right. Next up is difficult conversations. And so this is a topic I'm very passionate about. I learned this stuff straight from the professors at Harvard Law School who wrote a book on this by the same title. And it's amazing how much it has helped me in my personal life and in my clients' lives as well. Partnerships, people become much closer when they're able to overcome some of the typical conflicts that they have. And of course, in the workplace, some of these feedback conversations that I just talked about, where maybe someone on the team, if you're in an organization and someone offends someone else, you need to work it out, stuff like that. So this is really important stuff. It's quite in depth. And I just want to say this: the webinar will last 45 minutes, and then there will be time for questions at the end as well. So when you think about a difficult conversation, there's really 3 levels of conversation going on. And I have done a series on this on Instagram. It'll be on YouTube soon. But you've got the what happened conversation. This is above, if you picture like an iceberg, this is above the water. This is what people are seeing. Below that, you've got the feelings. And then below that, you've got identity. Now, I used to call the what happened conversation the facts conversation, but it's really not facts. And you'll see why in a second. So for the what happened conversation, there's 3 key points. Shift from certainty to curiosity. Stop arguing about who is right and start wondering, how does the other person think so differently than you? Explore their story. Don't assume that they meant it, so disentangle intent from impact. If they hurt you, maybe they didn't mean to hurt you, and vice versa. And this also, like neuroscience research shows that when people, especially if people are very emotional or angry, their frontal lobe is really literally shut down and people are in their amygdala at that point. And where does our logic center, our planning, our organization come from? It's the frontal lobe. So likely if someone's super mad at you, super angry and says something hurtful, it's likely that they did not mean it and they just wanted you to get away from them at that point. The last one is abandon blame. And map the contribution system. And this is what I'll focus on in the subsequent slides. Just blame is the worst thing that you can have in a relationship, the worst pattern, especially that you can have. It's not helpful, not helpful. So why do we abandon blame? I mean, look how sad she is. Don't you, that's not helpful. You're just going to break people down. You're just going to break people down. And it inhibits learning. So I say here, it inhibits our ability to learn what's really causing the problem and to do anything meaningful to correct it. And it's so true. So, what's the point of just, maybe someone is wrong actually, but what's the point of just focusing on that? It's just going to help them think how horrible of an employee they are, a partner they are, and things like that. So blame is about judging. Contribution is about understanding and moving forward. So how do you know you've got blame? Well, if people are being defensive, if there's strong emotion present, if people are interrupting, and if there's labels and should statements. So what do I mean by that? I mean, well, a good husband, there's your label, should take out the trash every week, or a good employee should do X, Y, Z. Now, this again is blaming and just going to chop people down, and it's not helpful. So anytime you've got that going on, it's a signal. And the more I work with people, the more that they're able to identify blame more quickly and shut it down and move towards contributions. It's part of our nature. It's part of our brain is wired for justice, so we look for blame, and it makes sense evolutionarily, but we don't need it all the time. So it is better because it asks, what did we each do or not do, right? As I've said often, you have contributed. Even if you think you're 100% in the right and this other person is super annoying and they're constantly doing things wrong, you've also contributed. And one of the things I help people do is find their own contributions. I have a video about contributions as well. So it's joint and interactive. It recognizes that it's a relation, even in a 2-person relationship, it's still a relationship. It's not just one person acting in a vacuum. And it allows the discovery of bad systems. So this is incredible for organizations, but even in partnerships, we have systems, we have roles that we play and things like that. So just recognizing that. So a lot of people that when I work with them, they might misconstrue, they might misinterpret what I'm saying when I'm talking about contributions. A lot of people think, because as I said earlier, I help people find their contributions, and it might feel like we're only focusing on theirs, and it's not true. So we're talking about both people's contributions. That's one thing I want to clear up. The other thing is, putting aside blame means putting aside my feelings. Absolutely false. It's, you can still have your feelings and get them acknowledged without blaming the person and labeling them and chopping them down. And then this last one is super important too. Exploring contribution means blaming the victim. So, even in cases where there is clearly someone who's right and someone who's wrong, the idea is that the person who is right still could have done something to fix the system to prevent this from happening and prevent it from happening next time, again, going forward. Now, of course, I'm not talking about crimes and things like that, and like someone assaults you when you're walking down the street. I'm not sure what you contributed to that situation. I'm talking more about your everyday activities and your conflicts and things like that. So super important to think about. The feelings conversation, there are 3 key points here, and I super, super really believe in this stuff. Have your feelings or they will have you. Now, a lot of people think that feelings make you irrational, that if you're having a negotiation or a difficult conversation, you should not express anger, for example, in its many forms, sadness, things like that. But at the same time, we know that if we don't express these feelings, they're going to have us, they're going to disrupt it. So, that's key. The next one is find the feelings lurking under attributions or judgments. So talk more in depth about that next. And then use the urge to blame as a cue to find important feelings. And so everything that I just told you about blame, people go for blame when they're feeling something. So the key here is that we can, instead of blaming, we can talk about our feelings. So for this first key point, have your feelings or they'll have you. A lot of times we try to take the feelings out. Okay, let's just solve the problem without emotion. It seems easier, or people just prefer it because a lot of times maybe they put emotions out in the past and their emotions haven't been recognized. It just hurts them more, which is valid, but it's much more effective to have your feelings, because unexpressed feelings can leak into the conversation, right? You try to hold that anger back, you try to hold something back. If you do it too long, it's just going to come out, and then you have a rage fest, and then you have to take a break. So that's important. And then unexpressed feelings make it difficult to listen. If I keep having a feeling and not expressing it, well, guess what? It's going to come back. I'm going to have to keep suppressing it. It's going to come back. So I can't listen if I'm managing my own emotions. So I really help people understand that it's much better to have these feelings. And share them with skill. So we don't want to just burst out and walk in and demand from our boss that, he change our schedule because of all of these things. So we need to accept that our feelings are normal, natural. We can recognize that even good people can have bad feelings. This is super important. Just a lot of emotions get labeled as negative, right? But really, everybody is entitled to their feelings, and having a quote unquote negative emotion does not say anything about you as a person. We're all human. So, the next thing is that your feelings are important. It's another thing that people who are in subordinate positions, who are hesitant to share feelings because they defer, or even in a partner, people have a habit of not expressing because they're invalidating their own feelings. Another key here is that there's always more than one emotion present, and that hidden feelings may block other emotions. So, for example, I was working with a woman, and she wanted to be able to express, love and affection for her husband, and she was having trouble. And when we dug a little deeper, it can't, I asked the question that was counterintuitive. Well, do you express anger and not hatred, but do you express anger and these things, some of these more negative emotions? And it turned out that she did not. So this is how, because she was not expressing anger and things like this, then she could not express the other emotions of love, affection. So hidden feelings can block the expression of other emotions. All right. So anytime you see an attribution or a judgment, there's a feeling underneath. So judgment, attribution, characterization, problem solving. This is a key that people are hurt underneath. Judgment. If you were a good friend, you would have been there for me. Why are you trying to hurt me? You're so inconsiderate. The answer is for you to call me more often. So we try to problem solve, right? Instead of saying I'm hurt or whatever. So really just know that there's feelings underneath, and it's much better to discuss those. All right. So I've talked about this stuff already, but just expressing the feeling, we can put the feeling out, and then we can negotiate with the feeling once it's out. So just because we're angry, or just because we're feeling some emotion present, sadness, anything, doesn't mean it's 100% true. But now that it's out, we can negotiate with the feeling. And this is so important because a lot of times acknowledging the feeling is sometimes the only thing that matters. Even if a person doesn't quote unquote get their way, they can still feel heard and seen. And this is now all of a sudden the conflict is gone. So pretty important to think about there. The core concerns: autonomy, affiliation, appreciation, fairness, role, and status. I've done a video on this, and I'm just going to be mindful of time here. But if you are interested in this, please take a look at the video. It's Difficult Conversations video 1, but everybody has these core concerns, and that a difficult conversation can trigger, for example, my status. And this is big in Eastern cultures where, status is much more emphasized, much more in the family, even at work. So things to think about here. All right, the deepest level of the difficult conversations is the identity conversation. The emotions protect the identity. I'm really passionate about teaching people about the importance of identity because it does not get talked about. If you want to, if you want to make someone feel awkward, start talking about their identity in everyday conversation and see how quickly they stop talking. So what you need to do is ask yourself what's at stake. We have 3 core identities, similar to a core concern. Am I competent? And this is about doing, right? So your role identities at work, as a partner. Am I competent? Am I doing it well? Am I a good person? This is personal identity. And am I worthy of love? This is big. This comes from the family, your sense of worth. So anytime you have a difficult conversation, people are threatened in these different ways. All right. And then once identity is triggered, it can result in two different things. People can deny and they can accuse the other person, and just, it's your fault. I didn't do that. I'm an expert. You're one to talk, things like that. Or they can exaggerate and just really turn on themselves. I always do this. It's all my fault. I'm the worst engineer. I'm a bad partner. So if you're having either of these types of thoughts, please know that your identity is triggered and you need to work with Greg Murray, the coach. No, but it's important. It's important to understand. All right. One solution here is to complexify, increase the complexity of your identity, your beliefs about yourself. Start thinking okay? So I'm always there for my children, or I'm always a good listener. Well, nobody is always anything. Nobody is always anything. This is your brain being lazy. Your brain is designed to save energy. So it's normal that we think black and white sometimes, but really no one is always anything. If you shift and you say, I'm there for my children and I lost my temper last night. Well, you're human, right? So it's really healthy. A lot of organizations will really focus on this and in trainings, how to move from but or black and white thinking and embrace complexity using and. All right. So just some things to think about: that you will make mistakes. Your intentions are complex. We can have what might be called negative intentions, right? Revenge. We can maybe just need attention sometimes. This is normal. So we always think we have the best intentions, but sometimes we can have complex intentions and needs. So, and we're human, and that you have contributed to the problem. All right. So one problem is that we can trigger people's identities from the start of a conversation. So this is why I like to tell people to get out ahead of this. So for example, if someone says, if you contest dad's will, it's going to tear the family apart. Well, this person may have good intentions and they don't want conflict in the family, but what the other person is going to hear is that they're selfish, ungrateful, and uncaring and things like that. Another example, I was very upset by what you said in front of our supervisor, right? Like some person might think I'm just expressing my emotion and getting these things off my chest, and that's positive. But what the other person is going to hear is, you betrayed me, you're stupid, why would you say that, right? Like, so even if you don't say these things, we need to know that we're going to trigger people's identities. So we can get out ahead of these things by just saying, I'm not saying you're stupid, or I'm not saying you're betraying me, but I just wanted to tell you what the impact of what you said was on me. All right. So another thing here is to begin from the third story. So what do I mean by the third story? There's a lot of different language for this in different methodologies. People talk about the witness, get in touch with your higher self, look at it from the balcony. this is really, what I'm calling here the third story. So someone who has no particular stake in this problem, if you can imagine like a person on a bicycle and a person in a car getting into an argument, well, who's telling the third story? It would be like the city planner or something like that, who understands, well, both of these people need to share the road, they need space and things like that. So can you step back and, disidentify from your own needs and emotions and think, how would the neutral party think about that? It's a good thing to do. All right, so 3 key listening skills. The first one is inquiry, and I'll go into that, but we've got paraphrasing and acknowledgement too. So inquiry is just, I'm encouraging people to ask open-ended questions, just be curious, learn, and try to understand how they see things so differently from you. And the reason that this is important, and I love this graphic, is that we're both climbing our own ladder. We're both reaching our conclusion. Our facts are in fact inferences. So we're all below this, selected data. Below that, we've got all the possible data in the room. So we're selecting data subconsciously, we're putting our spin on it, and then we're finding conclusions. How is their conclusion so different than ours? You need to inquire down their ladder. You need to start asking, what is their conclusion? Find what were the reasoning interpretations, and then get to their data. So we need to inquire down their ladder. And it takes a lot of skill. So examples here of hot inquiry. Hot inquiry is really negative. You're going to trigger the person's identity, essentially. You're going to put them on the defensive, and it's not going to go well. If you lead with hot inquiry, the conversation's over. You have to take a break, because this was interesting actually in our training, how true it is actually. Even when you're doing role plays and you lead with hot inquiry, you can really just put the person on defensive. So instead of saying, is it true that, you say things like, tell me more. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to put these all up on the screen here so you can see. But, the hot inquiry is also known as leading the witness in law. And, you're basically, it's a question, but it's a statement. It's phrased as a question, but really, you're telling them they're wrong, or you're just telling them something. So we really need to inquire down their ladder with open-ended questions and authentic inquiry. All right, paraphrasing is another great one, especially in a conflict. So just to show them that you've heard, and just to get confirmation that you did hear them correctly. So you restate what you heard the other person say without agreeing. You don't have to agree. Just to show them that you heard doesn't mean that you have to agree. So, again, similar with you're acknowledging an emotion, when you're acknowledging what they're saying, they feel heard. Sometimes that's all that it takes. So, it sounds like your biggest concern is X. Is that true? You want the corner office and the desk. That's correct. And things like this. So you don't have to say, yes, I agree with you. You're angry, and that's true, and you should be, but you can go a long way just by paraphrasing what someone is saying. Acknowledgement. So again, we have invisible questions. When someone is expressing an emotion, the reason people don't express emotion is because of these questions. Are my feelings appropriate? Are they okay? Do you understand my feelings? Do you care about my feelings? Do you care about me? If we go too long without getting our emotions validated or heard, we stop sharing them. So just know that if someone does express an emotion, acknowledge that, and know that these questions are underlying. So order does matter. We need to acknowledge these things before working to problem solve. If someone doesn't feel heard first, and you're going and trying to solve their problems, they won't want to. They won't want to help you solve the problem, because they won't think you understand the problem. So that matters. And again, you don't have to agree. It's more about the effort of trying to understand someone that really matters. All right. So I'm going to move through this because we have to get to negotiations. I know we're running a little over time, but I do think it's great stuff. So big thing with negotiations, there was a key shift recently. So it used to be about hard and soft negotiating and based on positions. And now they've changed it to negotiate based on interest and merits. So for example, soft negotiation was, the participants are friends and the goal is to reach an agreement. Whereas if a hard negotiator is here, they're your adversary and the goal is to win. Now, organizations and nations even had both styles and people that were experts at both styles, right? The soft negotiator would preserve the relationship. They would reach that agreement most likely, whereas the hard negotiator would go in and they would win. Well, it's different now. They've changed it to be about principled negotiations where both participants are problem solvers and the goal is a wise outcome reached efficiently and amicably. All right, and I'll go through some examples of what I mean. The shift between soft and hard, from soft and hard to principled, is really significant. So more examples here. The soft style, you're making concessions to cultivate the relationship. You're going to be soft on people and the problem. You're going to trust others. Whereas the hard negotiator would demand that the other party concede as a part of the relationship, right? If this is going to happen, if we're going to do this, I need this from you. And they would be hard on the people and the problem, right? And they would be distrustful. Well, the shift is to separate the people from the problem and be soft on people and hard on the problem, right? Be really serious about what you want and what your interests are, but it's not personal. So you completely remove that element, which is nice. So you're independent of trust. It doesn't really matter as much because you're now talking about principles. All right, so that's one key shift. Another one is the soft negotiator would change their position easily. They would make offers. They would tell them their bottom line, like I can't go below this, right? The hard negotiator would dig their heels in. I'm not going below, this. I'm not going to negotiate past that. They'll make threats, ultimatums, things like that. It's been proven that these things do not work actually. And so what we're doing now is we're exploring interests. So creative problem solving, right? If the teenager wants to stay out with their friends, but the parent wants the teenager to be safe, well, the parent might say, be home at 10. And the teenager saying, well, party's just getting started. Like, so, if instead of fighting over, I want to stay out late, no, you need to come home early, and then holding that positions, if the parent will just say, I'm interested in you being safe, well, then perhaps the teenager can sleep over there or can talk to the parents. Like, this is just one generic example. And again, the bottom lines, the ultimatums, they don't help. All right. Other shifts, soft negotiator would accept a one-sided loss to reach agreement and search for that single answer. And the hard negotiator will say, I'm only going to search for this if, I'm only going to accept this one thing. Whereas now we're looking for, we're looking for mutual gain. So this, I talked a little bit about earlier in the collaboration, develop multiple options and then choose later, perhaps. So you can just throw a bunch of things out there and not decide on it right away, but make a list, decide on it in the morning. It's really effective. All right. The soft negotiator would insist on agreement and try to avoid a contest of will and yield to pressure. You notice the conflict styles coming in here, right? The yielding, the accommodating, that's the soft negotiation stance. Whereas the hard negotiator would be that competitive person and try to win, apply pressure. And instead now we're going to use objective standards. So how are we going to measure this? How will we know if it's fair or not? You agree on these things ahead of time, right? So in real estate, this is another thing where negotiations are big. Well, what are the objective standards? What are the other houses selling for in the neighborhood, right? There's these objective standards, and that's just one example. All right. So these are the 7 elements of negotiating. Alternatives. So before you go into a negotiation, you need to know what they call a BATNA, better alternative to negotiated agreement. If you don't get the salary you're looking for, well, can you get more money? Do you have an alternative somewhere else where you can get at least $50,000, if they're not meeting your needs here. It's really, really important to know what your alternatives are as well as the other parties, because you can think about, well, how can I improve my alternatives, as well as how can I make their alternatives worse? Is there any way I can make their alternatives not as good, not as appealing, so that I look better? So alternatives is really key. Interests, again, I talked about earlier, we're going to look to negotiate on interests, not positions. So if you really want your schedule, you want your day to end at 2 p.m. so you can get out and see your family, maybe your child is playing sports or something like that. This is an interest, so you don't say I need to get out at 2 p.m. every day. Instead, you talk about interests and try to create mutual gain. Options, what this is similar. So options is just generating options. So if both parties have expressed their interests and their positions are still clashing, what are some other options? You create new options, you create new quote unquote positions or outcomes. Criteria, again, this is, how are we measuring these things objectively, like the real estate example. Communication is just, how are you framing things? How are you saying things? Are you avoiding triggering identity? Are you being clear? Things like that. Relationship, how much emphasis are you placing on the relationship? Is there any way you can improve it? I help people think about, what's the relationship now? What do you want the relationship to be after the negotiation? And what will it take to get there, and things like that? And this is how people can really talk to each other, just being open. What is our relationship now? Things like that. And then lastly, it's commitment. So if an agreement is reached, how will we know if we're upholding the agreement after the fact? How are we going to measure it, right? Let's set some standards to know, if this agreement is being held. So the really cool thing is that I help people prepare for negotiations. I help people prepare for difficult conversations using all of these standards. There's nice little, exercises that we fill out together. Just takes a lot of the grief out, takes a lot of the anxiety away and the unknowns. And it's really, really special stuff. So thank you guys for attending. You know that you can, adaptiveedgecoaching.com. You can email me at any time, and definitely taking questions right now if there are any.